Welcome to Federalism. That's our topic this week, and that topic is really not as intimidating as it sounds. It's not that complicated, not that complex. Let's take a look at what federalism really is. Its simple definition is a political system in which authority is divided between different levels of government. This seems pretty simple. Basically, all it's saying is the federal government has certain duties enumerated in the Constitution, and the state governments have certain duties that they are to carry out, and each is to do its own thing. However, in terms of which levels of government do what, the Founding Fathers left it deliberately ambiguous because they knew that the Constitution would not be ratified if they tried to get too specific. So what we've ended up with is a very simple definition, a very complex interpretation, a lot of conflicting ideas over the years, which we still have the debates to this day over what is the proper role of the federal government vis-a-vis the state governments. For those of you who have not ever taken a look at this inside your Constitution, let's see if we can get the Constitution to actually come up here. And we want to take a look at a couple of things I just want to point out to you very quickly, if it will come on up. I wanted to show you the section of the Constitution which enumerates the powers of the federal government and the one which reserves powers to the states. So what we want to do is, let's see if we can make this good. You have all this stuff messing up my internet today. Everybody's got to run their little ads. Article 1, Section 8. Oops, I'm in the wrong section here. Bear with me a minute. Powers of Congress are clearly enumerated here in the Constitution. So you might pull out your little pocket Constitution that I know all of you carry around and take a look at this. This is Article 1, the legislative branch, defining the powers of Congress. The Congress shall have the power to do taxes, duties, blah, 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 pay debts, provide for the common defense, all that sort of stuff, which we're all familiar with. But here is a continuation of the list of the things it can do: to borrow money, regulate commerce with foreign nations, among the states, blah, blah, blah. You can go up online and read that for yourself. Here's the kicker, though. They listed all these things the federal government could do, and then they put a clause in here which we call the necessary and proper clause. That they can do all this stuff, and then they can also make all laws which are necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. In other words, they can execute whatever laws they need to help them carry out those duties. Now, the debate has gone on for many, many years about, well, what are the powers of Congress and what are the powers of the states? And many people cite the 10th Amendment as something that clearly limits the power of the federal government. We can get over here to the amendments. Oops, that is not the link that I wanted. We'll go back to the Constitution. Take the full Constitution text. Hang on one second. Maybe this wasn't the best idea in the world. They've gummed up our internet so much with all these stupid advertisements that you can't do anything in a timely way. So here we go. The 10th Amendment is known as the States' Rights Amendment. This is where our Founding Fathers tried to clearly identify what role the states had to play. This was put on there with the rest of the amendments at the insistence of the Anti-Federalists. Notice this is a very simple amendment if you've never read it. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So this gives you kind of an idea of the conflicting things. We have what we call the States' Rights Amendment, the Necessary and Proper Clause, and so we have a lot of debate over what's the proper role of these two levels of government. This is sort of the way it looked in the beginning. You've got national rights and responsibilities, powers reserved to the states. These are concurrent powers where they overlap, and you can see in here that the states and the federal government both do these types of things. Federalism has evolved due to a number of reasons, though, and by meaning federalism has evolved, what I mean by that is that the nature and purpose and duties of the federal government have grown and grown and grown for a number of different reasons. One is judicial interpretation. Right out of the gate, there were challenges to the supremacy of the federal government. This was settled at the Supreme Court level in a case called McCulloch v. Maryland, which is a very important case that you need to understand a little bit. The custom up until that time had been for the states, or until then the colonies, to charter their own banks. So in the state of Maryland, any bank that was not chartered by the state was subject to a huge tax. Well, McCulloch, who was a cashier at the Baltimore branch of the Bank of the United States, which had been set up after the ratification of the Constitution, refused to pay the tax levied by the state, and he was convicted in a state court for failing to pay a tax. This was appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the ruling was as follows. Chief Justice Marshall at the time ruled that, number one, that the federal government does have the power to establish a national bank under the Necessary and Proper Clause. However, Maryland does not have the right to tax it, because to assume that the states have the power to tax the federal government would have given them supremacy over the feds. So basically they're saying that the federal government reigns supreme and the states cannot do anything of that sort. The power to tax is the power to destroy, is the way it was reasoned at the time. Then along came the Civil War, and that certainly to a great extent was fought over whether or not the southern states had the right to secede from the Union. They invoked the doctrine of nullification, which basically said that we are not going to obey or recognize any federal laws that we don't feel are appropriate. And we fought a civil war to decide who was in charge. It was finally settled that you cannot secede from the Union. Nullification was forever buried as a concept. And the power of the federal government was further established as supreme. Federal power was restrained, however, in the late 19th century. The federal government could promote economic development, and by things like granting interstate monopolies, land grants, but if it tried to regulate capitalism, it couldn't do that. These things here were definitely left to the purview of the states. So that kind of thing was viewed as usurping the authority of state governments when you try to get involved in this kind of stuff. So the way federalism looked at the end of the 19th century is the national government performed these duties, which you see here, and the states had all these things reserved to them for their power. Now, have no fear, I will post these slides in a PDF file that you can access online, and you can read these at your leisure. Then we had national crisis, and this is one thing that often makes the federal government grow. You read about the Great Depression in your textbook, so I'm not going to get into too many details of that, but let's say it was a very, very severe crisis. We had about 25% of our workforce was unemployed. People were homeless, destitute. When Franklin Roosevelt was elected, this was a situation he inherited. What he did when he came into office is he immediately, as your book points out, proposed a whole host of new programs to put people back to work, to get money flowing through the economy. He created many, many public works programs that are discussed in the video. He pushed for greater regulation of business and banking so that we have the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance guarantee that our money will be safe in the banks. Creation of the welfare state, where you have Social Security and those kinds of programs now. So other New Deal programs, a few more of them in the area of public works. These are some of them that he created. These were all things to build goods and things that the public could use that would also create jobs and put people to work. Other New Deal programs at the time were regulatory, stepping into areas the federal government had previously not been in. Regulating banks, set up the Securities and Exchange Commission, passed the Fair Labor Standards Act that Congress did at the time. So we had an awful lot of things going on. Well, what you have to remember is, here's some more New Deal programs. What you have to remember is that every time we create a new government program, we create more government. You have to have a bureaucracy to administer it. You have to have a department. So this greatly expanded the role of the federal government in our personal lives. This was something new and different. The federal government got much closer than it had ever been, particularly when it got in this area of redistributive and social programs, as you see here. Then we had the new issues come along in the 20th century, civil rights, application of the 14th Amendment to the states, growing awareness of the need for environmental protection laws. And in the 21st century, we had the attacks by terrorists on the homeland in 2001. So when you start bringing the federal government in to protect people's civil rights of African Americans and others, making sure that the states honor everybody's citizenship by providing them free and fair access to the ballot and allowing them to go to school, as you saw in the video, environmental protection issues came along at that time. A big environmental movement, late 60s, early 70s. You had other things too that I've not even mentioned up there. You've got women's rights, all kinds of things like that coming along. Gay rights. And so this establishes new agencies of oversight for each of these areas. And then in the ultimate, in the 21st century, on 9/11, the attacks by the terrorists, which then resulted in the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. So what we basically had is an enormous growth in the federal government, no doubt far beyond the scope that the founders had ever envisioned it would be doing. So the question we want to look at this week then is this appropriate? Has the federal government taken on too much? So watch the embedded video and go to the discussion board, and hopefully we'll have a rousing discussion about this week. Take care.